Our DNA know that we are more at risk for predation, accidents, starvation, etc., when we are not part of a community that sees us and that we feel safe in. And belonging is the sensation that best captures that feeling of whether you're on the right track on that score or whether you're on the wrong track on that score. And our bodies tell us loud and clear when you're going through what we call culture shock. This is Safe Passage, where we invite you to explore the internal journey of transformation and change.
Whether it's relocation or retirement, the birth of a child or the loss of a loved one, life invites us, sometimes forces us to evolve.
So where do you turn when you feel stuck or unsure of what's next? I'm Doug Ota.
And I'm Nikki Muller. Welcome to Safe Passage. Today we're having an open and honest conversation about the core human need that really drives our behaviors, our actions, and fuels our sense of purpose, belonging. When we're in transition and find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, whether it's a new neighborhood, another company, or another country, our sense of belonging can often feel like it's on trial. And as my co-host, Doc Doug, affirms, people in transition are looking for a community to attach to. Every human being, no matter how independent you are, wants to belong to a community. Because to belong is to matter. Only when you feel seen, heard, and accepted by your peers can you truly be at your best. So let's break this down. Doc Doug, you've said that when we transition into a new place, we lose connections to people who know our story. I find that so powerful. Why is this so important to us?
We want to exist, right? It's the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody around, right? Is there a sound? If you don't feel that anybody knows your inner experience, knows any of your background, it's kind of like being invisible. I think that's probably exactly what it feels like when we're new in a place, right?
You're absolutely right. That feeling of being invisible, and where do you even begin? Human beings are so complex. Our story matters. This is something you write in your book. Your story matters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. You know, one of the first studies that I bumped into, forget the German researchers, but it's in the 2010s, they showed that this is true on just the most simple and even seemingly unimportant of ways, like when you're just walking down the street. And they had a Confederate who was part of the research. And every time somebody would walk down the street, one of the Confederates would either look at them in a friendly way, or look at the person they were passing as though they were made of glass. There's a saying in German, I forget what it was, but to literally be looked through. And then further up the pathway, the person who had just been passed by the Confederate would be stopped by a researcher and invited to answer a couple of questions. And some of the questions were basically just, how are you feeling right now? And there was a measurable difference for people who had been looked through. They weren't feeling as well compared to the people who had actually been looked at. It was measurable, and there was no words exchanged. There was no relationship. Now take that and multiply that far bigger in terms of people that you really know, people who you care about, people who care about you, and take away all of those reinforcements to our identity. You know, it's sort of funny to think about how surprising it is that we're surprised by this. Getting ready for today, I was thinking that there's all these findings we're going to talk about how belonging is so important, the scientific evidence of that. And what's actually maybe most surprising is that we're surprised.
I agree. I agree. The more I read about it, I'm also shocked. And yet, you know what it is? It's being able to understand intellectually what we know intuitively. I've heard this through Chris O'Shaughnessy, and he heard it through someone else. But I think it's that, right? It's, again, being able to explain why we feel what we feel already is such a relief. It doesn't necessarily change anything. You have to do that part. But just to know that...
If you don't have words right?
Yeah.
If you don't have words for your experience, that's the worst. And nobody sees you, and you don't even know that you're not being seen. But to make it worse, when the surrounding society, and we are very guilty of this in the West, give you a story that you need to be self-sufficient, and the successful people can do it on their own.
You think we've been sold a lie on that front?
We have been biologically. Our DNA doesn't agree with that at all. It doesn't. And unless we keep living this way and adapting to it for maybe several million years, it won't. Our DNA hate being alone. And I think that's probably the theme of our talk today.
Absolutely. One of the things that you've said is people in transition are arriving with a suitcase in one hand and a bundle of roots in another, and they're looking for soil in which to gently plant those roots so that they can begin again. But why does this process often feel so vulnerable and frightening? I know it's multi-layered, but let's just start from there.
Well, first of all, I want to apologize to all of my English teachers for mixing metaphors in what you just quoted.
Metaphors are beautiful.
They are, but and I'm prone to them, but it's good to be selective. Why? That's a big question, Nikki. Why does this feel so hard? Maybe roots is a good place to start. When you look at a tree or a plant's roots, there's large strands, and then there's smaller ones, and then there's smaller ones, and then there's things that are downright capillary-ish. We're made of all of those things, too. Some of our connections are big core roots to important people. And this has been measured, it's also important to have those teeny little, seemingly unimportant connections of just the baker who smiles at you because you know that baker recognizes you.
Yes, those kinds of micro connections. Yeah.
You're in transition right now. One of my transitions when I was in my early 20s, I just moved to the Netherlands, and we just moved to a new neighborhood and bought a new house. It was our first house. Very exciting. But as a 26-year-old, there was an awful feeling as I walked around our new neighborhood, and I was trying to sort of describe it. And it was literally that nobody knew me in little ways. Every single person was new. Every single corner was new. There was not a familiar anything, to say nothing of being away from the friends I'd left in the States and all those things. Those big roots. There weren't any of the capillaries. And how many capillaries does a mature plant tree have? We don't necessarily consciously think of the capillaries in our life, but we're made of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of them, right?
Absolutely. I think that we only start to truly understand the importance of belonging when it has been taken away, right? It's something that we can easily take for granted. And if someone has lived in one particular place or neighborhood and grown up there and really built those foundations, those roots, those capillaries, I mean, thank goodness in a way, because you can function at your best knowing that strong sense of community knows you, accepts you, and that's when you can take more risks and you can plunge and you can think creatively. And I mean, that's incredible. And for... Yes,
Nikki,
go ahead.
I have to share something because you just gave me goosebumps, and I hadn't thought about this for probably 45 years. It made a big impression on me, but I've never written or talked about it. I'm standing in the kitchen of my best friend's house, one of my best friends, John Traylor, if you're listening to this, wherever you are. And John had just moved with his family from this house that we'd always gone and visited up on the hill to this wonderful house down near the ocean in La Jolla, California. And I was visiting after they'd lived there for a month. It was probably my first time there. I'd spent the night there. And John was in the kitchen and he couldn't find a spoon. He kept opening the drawers looking for where the spoons were. And he broke into tears. And I was so confused. I was watching him wondering, why is my friend crying about a spoon? And I haven't thought about it probably much, certainly not much, but what you just said brought that capillary to mind, because the spoon was just the straw on the camel's back. Apologies about the metaphors. There were so many things that he couldn't find that were different, that were wrong. And when you can't even find the simplest thing like a spoon, your life is in disarray. I think that's why John broke into tears, but nobody said that to him. I certainly wasn't in a place yet to say that to him.
It's so interesting that flashback has come to you right now as we have this conversation, and there you are in that kitchen, and you're right. It's the compounded stress from all fronts when your belonging is in question, and how things operate differently around you. Every single nuance that used to work perfectly when you were where you were, and you knew the people, and you knew which roads, and you knew which bus, all those things, right? And when it's taken away, I mean, whether it happens once, whether it happens a few times, or consistently, which is what we experience, right, at international schools or international organizations with high turnover, and that mobility is part and parcel of their life. You're being stripped bare and having to build some of the most basic foundations over and over again. And as relational beings, it's our social connections that are at the heart of belonging, as you've been saying. I'd like to bring up David Pollock, the sociologist, of course, who has a deep expertise in third culture kid experience, that of people like me, millions of people like me who grew up in constant transition, beginning again in different parts of the world. And you quoted him in your first book. He used to say, you need 6 months to pack up your heart before leaving, and 6 months to unpack it after you arrive. What's happening there underneath the surface as you look to rebuild your life somewhere else and find new community? I found that interesting that it was 6 months, and also the fact that it's about your heart.
I guess my answer to this is that the world we live in focuses on the outside and often forgets the inside. And belonging has outside practical components, but yeah, it's a feeling, and it's based on these capillaries and these teeny little rootlets that grow slowly. And when I first heard David say that, I was struck by it. I thought, wow, that's long. I actually think it's maybe even conservative now. Ask any educator who's been there for 6 months, but they're still bumping into new things about how that school deals with the month of April. Ask anybody who's lost their husband what that first August is like. Even though it's 10 months on, it's still the first one. I think it's maybe even respectful to expand that to a year at minimum. And even then, it might take longer. Some people grow their rootlets more quickly. They've been given a deck of cards or a hand of cards from the universe that makes that a little easier for them. We know that extroversion, sociability, these kinds of personality traits, openness, make transitions and moving easier. But those qualities aren't better. And our Western world, and Susan Cain's work, on and her book Quiet, and the world of the introverts, I think, was the first to really put this on the map. But it deserves as much respect and is important in a team, in a world, as the extroverts. And those people's rootlets, I would include myself in that, grow more slowly. Yeah. And so again, I guess my answer to you is coming back to that tree metaphor. And watching how long any tree, any plant would take. Would it pull it off in 6 months? Probably not. And what happens when that plant's moved to garden after garden after garden? It's going to develop strategies for coping with that, at least over evolutionary history, if it's given a chance. But let's say a plant could think about that quickly and have to say, well, what am I going to do? Because this keeps happening. It's going to develop a strategy.
And yeah, I am actually curious to hear what some of those strategies are, whether that, through your own work or what you've seen, some students or parents or people who have to begin again often and need to build community because, you always say that you never outgrow this need. This is us biologically. How do you get good at beginning again and finding your sense of tribe when it happens so often?
Well, if you're lucky enough to have the personality traits and the support to lean into the experience and try, then if you just use your imagination and stay with the tree metaphor, you're gonna look for the things that you can connect to quickly, reach fast-growing roots that dive into things where you think you can find some anchor points, the activities that you like, certain kinds of people you're going to attach quickly. Barbara Shetty was the first to teach this to me back in the 90s. You're also going to have a quick release mechanism. You're probably not going to develop lots of the rootlets, because the rootlets, those deep multi connections, are what actually creates strain when you're pulling a root out of the ground, right? It's more efficient, less frictional if you've just got a couple of deep connections. And when you see that move coming, when you see that moving truck in the road next to the backyard, yeah, you start releasing those roots, greasing them so that they come out quickly. And that's a well-documented phenomenon too, that many in this world know. You probably know it. There's that quick release phenomenon, as it's called, of probably saying goodbye in a way that could seem early and rather sudden to people who had felt attached to you, who weren't used to being moved like you were, that all of a sudden, wow, you're gone, and quickly. And is that bad? Is that good? I'd refrain personally from sort of a value judgment on it and start certainly with just validating that it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, one of the things you say or talk about is that tightening and loosening of affectional bonds. I was wondering if you could just expand on that a little bit, since it sounds like we're going down this road and I'm very interested to go down that road.
Sure. Well, that phrase deserves due credit to the great John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, together with Mary Ainsworth, and he wrote a book with that in its title. And so I've cited that when I use this phrase, because it's a really nice way to think about what's happening and what needs to happen. You do also need to loosen affectional bonds when you're moving. The people who stay tied and tight, too tight to their old friends in New York after they've moved, let's say, to the American School of The Hague. They're the ones in the computer lab, spending time chatting or gaming early in the morning with those kids who are up late at night, which is fine. But the more energy you throw down one root system is energy that's not going into building a new root system. And so that friction can slow you down and even restrain building a new life. The loosening is grief. It's hard. It's difficult. It can be done too fast. It can be done too slow. Where's the Goldilocks zone? That's where I have long argued, and SPAN as an organization, I would say, stands for calling people, educators, parents, to account for training kids, creating educational systems that teach kids how, first of all, why this is important, but how to tighten and loosen affectional bonds. It can be done too quickly. It can be done too slowly. And it is an emotional skill because fundamentally it involves being able to grieve, being able to say goodbye without having a fight, for example, to make saying goodbye easier, without ditching people. Teaching kids that these relationships that you need to become tied to, you need to also loosen if you have to move, are important for their mental and physical health for the rest of their lives. And one could argue, to finish that point, one could argue that we never outgrow the need for connection, including maybe to everybody we've ever been connected to. Why, in this world that we currently live in, would it even be necessary not to know that you could reach out to somebody 10 years later and say, hey, Joe, right? Can our hearts be big enough to hold on to all of those connections?
This is an interesting segue to what I was going to bring up about a dear friend of mine who, as an adult, it's when she started to move around for work, and she knows that she's going to be in the Middle East for only 1 year. And as she was spending a few more months in Europe with some family in between, before starting her new life in the Middle East with her husband, who has a job there, and she's going to be working remotely from there, you could tell she was under a bit of stress. And one of the things she said is, I feel guilty for not being able to spend time with everybody that matters here. I said, you've had 4 months. I think you've done the best you can. She goes, yes. And I also really don't plan to make any new friends in the Middle East. And I said, why would you not want to make new friends? She goes, because I know I'm going to leave. And to be honest, I love my friendship circle, and I feel like I'll be doing them a disservice if I spend time trying to find new connections where I am, knowing full well that in 1 year I will have to, as you say, loosen those bonds. So I spent some time thinking about that, because I have heard this before, as people who are quite transient can get exhausted from going in deep and then having to say goodbye, because that causes so much stress and pain and grief. But I said, that is a whole year of opportunities and connections that just because you leave does not mean they're not going to be one of these good friends you really do care about down the line.
Yep.
And the people that you meet there, many of them will happen to understand what this life of transience is like, whilst perhaps those who live in a monoculture where she grew up and they've stayed in the same neighborhood don't quite relate on that level. We have different layers of community, people who understand a facet of us, because we are complicated individuals. No one is going to understand absolutely everything or relate or empathize with all your experiences. I mean, I'm wondering what your take on that is when people say, I don't want to invest in social connections. I know I'm not there long enough.
I think it's evidence of probably two things. First, it's a coping strategy right there. Let's face it, none of us knows how long we're here. And one way of dealing with life is to say, it's all for naught because we're going to die anyway, so what's the point? And that's a depressive position. Probably everybody has occupied it at some point, certainly as a teenager or an adolescent philosopher. But that's our task as human beings, is to make sense of what's the meaning of this, given that that's true. And is that any different on the life scale than it is on, let's say, an airplane ride? Forget who it was that talked about a single serving friend. A single serving friendship, I think it was. Maybe it was a film. But those are the people that you bump into that you know. By pretty much any measure, you're never going to sit next to them ever again. You're never going to talk to them ever again. And yet we all know the most remarkable encounters that can occur when we open ourselves to that. The same happens on trains and buses. There's been studies of people who've been helped to not have their phone in their hands for some other reason. I think the researchers would find some way to do that, and others were encouraged to have their phones on their hands, and how they felt at the end of a train ride. And I think there had to be some condition to help the people without phones try to have a small conversation with somebody. And even the smallest, seemingly trivial conversations contributed measurably to a sense of well-being. Because going back to the beginning of our conversation, we need that. We are communal creatures, and it feels good to do that. Now, I would say that your friend is exemplifying something. Again, I don't want to diagnose at a distance, but in my experience, many people who struggle with the feelings involved with, these stark philosophical realities we're talking about, the pain of saying goodbye. You have to be able to deal with your big feelings to go here. I think this is as good a point as any to introduce a very large idea that I think we'll be talking about for a long time, Nikki. Something a supervisor of mine once said, on an earlier master's dissertation. And I was so puzzled when the great Lisbeth Ehrlings said, you have to be securely attached to grieve. Huh? I understand that now profoundly, 2 or 3 decades on.
I mean, Queen Elizabeth said, grief is the price we pay for love. And that's so true.
That is true. That's true. I think that's another super important true point. The point I want to really make sure I'm making clear here about attachment security being a prerequisite for grief and what this has to do with belonging, without getting into the attachment security, which we will do.
Which we will in another episode.
Future.
We need to dedicate it. Absolutely.
But to go to these big feelings that are involved with these themes that we're talking about is scary. And you have to have had people, parents, and also schools, I argue, that have helped you learn to go and to hold and be with these big feelings. And if you haven't had that experience, if you've had the experience, the encouragement even of you need to do these kinds of things on your own, friend. Big people don't have these big feelings. We don't know what to do with them. If they're ignored, people find workarounds. And one of the ways they can do that is just to seal them off and say, I just don't want to do that. I can't do that. It hurts too much. And full disclosure, I've spent plenty of time in that zone as a younger man.
As have I, absolutely.
Yeah. And so the theme of the moral of the story here is that the only way I know of to deal with this is to lean into it. This is from somebody who's spent many times trying to lean away from it.
Or to find a shortcut, maybe.
Find a shortcut. And all of those other ways are at the expense of what I would argue is the best way for us from a meaning point of view, from a physical health point of view, from a mental health point of view. It's not easy, but to lean into these feelings and to grab hold of the people who can do that with you and to cultivate that in the people around you, the schools you work at, the schools your kids go to. Because what's the alternative? It's to shut down big parts of who we are as people, and arguably one of the major, if not the major sources of meaning in a human life.
And talking about big feelings, and earlier you were talking about belonging as a feeling, right? Because it is a sense of belonging. We feel that in our bodies. We all know what it's like, that warm, tingly sensation when we feel included in something, right? Or completely accepted for who we are, warts and all. Or we also know the feeling of that crippling sensation inside when we've been shunned, right? Or been turned away, whether it's someone making a comment, or you're not invited to a party, or you're not invited to contribute to something. It really is a feeling, and a very, very powerful one.
It really is a feeling. I want to underline that and come back to that in this talk.
Would you like to go there now?
Sure. Because you wanted to get into our brains, right? Into the neurobiology. I am going to get into
our brains, but I'm also going with the flow, which I think is the most important thing to do, to lean in. So let's go. It is a feeling. Let's talk about that.
Well, it's real. And it is measurable. When people feel left out, the exact same centers in their brain that cope with the sensation of physical pain are active. The anterior cingulate cortex lights up in an fMRI. And Naomi Eisenberger's research was fundamental in calling our attention to this. And I tell my clients who are in pain, emotional pain usually, that to validate them, and this is true, this is not just, I'm not just saying this, if it's really bad, if we were to put your brain in an fMRI, and I was to ask a neurobiologist, is this person got a broken leg or feeling terribly left out, no sense of belonging? Would they be able to tell the difference? They wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
That kind of social exclusion actually causes physical pain, or lights up the same parts of our brain that demonstrates that.
Yeah, we call that exaptation, this tendency of the brain to use existing networks and to sort of retool them rather than developing other networks. The brain's a smart thing. And what's the most efficient way to use Let's see, to create the sensation that this isn't good, being left out, having no belonging is not good. Let's make it hurt.
Literally.
Yes.
Right? Let's make it hurt. Literally. Those are the harmful effects. That emotional injury, right?
And there's good news to this too. Eisenberger's research has also, she did a spin-off hypothesis on this, that if people have a warm feeling, like literally a warm blanket around them or something that just feels really nice in winter, what would happen in the brain compared to if they felt like socially accepted? If they were getting really validating, nice, lovely messages from their environment. And you can't tell the difference there either. The same warm areas of the brain. And that's why she argues we came up with language that says, such a warm person. That when you're having that experience,
eye-opening, Doc. I love that.
Isn't that neat? I think it's
it's the positive flip side.
Yeah,
Our brain is fair.
It's right. That's a really good way to say it. This isn't just bad news. It's fair.
So this is why it matters, guys. How interesting. Thank you for that. Oh, I feel much better. I wanted to also talk about this, the importance of feeling safe and secure, right? And ways in which perhaps when we are somewhere new in a new environment, where perhaps everything is new about it, where those feelings of safety and security are tested. I was wondering if you had any examples. Maybe you were involved in something like that, or anything you'd like to share about when we feel that's being tested.
Our safety and our security
in a new environment.
Oh, countless. You always know when your heart rate's going up and you feel anxious. Your body will tell you. Those
and
clammy
it accumulates
hands.
and it compounds over time, just like your friend with the spoon. At some point, something's got to give.
If you don't honor it and pay attention to it, sure. That's where it'll turn into a full-blown panic disorder or something like that, or a panic attack. So our body is trying to signal to us, and that's not the only reason, of course. Belonging is not the only important thing out there. Let's make that clear. But Roy Baumeister in 1995 made the argument with his belongingness hypothesis, and I didn't cite him, unfortunately, because I hadn't read that paper yet when I wrote my book, but certainly Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I invoke in the book. But Baumeister was the one who suggested that belonging actually belongs right above the need for air and food. And
I would agree that it really ought to be closer to the foundation, air and food and water, right? Yeah.
I think your body, needs. Our bodies would agree too. And this isn't an opinion. This is a very well argued scientific argument that he and I think the literature make since 95, and the entire field of attachment theory makes. There's so much here, but let me just say at the outset that belonging is attachment writ large, in my opinion. Attachment and the security of attachment that we need in our individual relationships. When you add it up across all of these relationships, big, medium, small, and capillary-like, when you add all that up into something that feels good, that's belonging. And Baumeister and Leary, I think was his co-author, made the argument that this is important down to the level of our DNA, because our DNA know that we are more at risk for predation, accidents, starvation, etc., when we are not part of a community that sees us and that we feel safe in. And belonging is the sensation that best captures that feeling of whether you're on the right track on that score or whether you're on the wrong track on that score. And our bodies tell us loud and clear when you're going through what we call culture shock. It's much more of a cognitive idea, I would say. There is a visceral bodily component to all of this. And our bodies know sometimes way before our brains want to acknowledge you're in trouble here.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about it quickly either, at least not on a large scale. It takes time to start to build this and address this. But if you don't even know that that's the case, that you've got a major project on your hands, that just getting the boxes unpacked, you're not done yet, then you can be really surprised. And that's where the idea of the honeymoon ending, I think, that's where that came from. Barbara Shetty would, in her trainings, would rightly say, how people would come in and there'd be this upswing of, yay, we're here, we're in our new life. And then there'd be this downswing.
It's like, oh, okay, it's not all rosy anymore. Yeah.
And I think that's also because
that's
also just because the boxes had been distracting you from
of
the
course.
belonging
Another
issues.
Coping mechanism. Oh, I'm the queen of this. I'm the queen of this. Avoidance? Yes, please. I am your master.
Not by the time we're done with our podcast.
I'm learning. After having read your book, I realized, and of course, as you say, attachment theory and attachment styles, it all started to make sense, but only when you're ready. It's interesting. People can tell you, if you told me this 15, 20 years ago, I think it would have gone right above my head. I simply wasn't ready or open to receive this information in a way that would have a lasting effect. I think so it's right timing. It really is right timing. And you touched on culture shock just a while ago and the idea of when rules change, right? So I was anticipating this move to Switzerland, being half Swiss, but never really living here. And my dad was giggling. He goes, oh, girl, this is going to be interesting. Let me make some popcorn, right? And I knew rules would change. Of course, I just didn't know how many rules would change. And that compounding feeling of, my goodness, really everything is different, has been stressful. But I wanted to talk a little bit about language, because language is also something that really connects us and allows us to express who we are, right? And I think we can all remember a time, whether we were on holiday somewhere or you were in a new job setting, new environment, and that language around you you just didn't understand it. And that can feel so isolating. And it's another point of disconnect that compounds over time and contributes to that stress of our belonging being under threat. So I'm wondering if you have a similar experience to that, because, we talk about language as being something that children learn, and to all of a sudden feel almost foolish, not being able to express and communicate or understand what's going around you. That is a massive threat. Did you have an experience like that with language at all?
Absolutely. Many. And I think language tells people, without making it explicit, do you belong where you are now standing? And if you're having the experience second after second of, I don't know what's going on around me, I don't know what they're saying, I also don't even know if they're saying something about me, which is entirely possible, right? Especially how people can be, and maybe kids can be with each other. That's an alarming, disturbing state to be in. I also just want to flip this too, Nikki, if I may, because this is going to date this podcast a bit, but I think that's okay. We have to remember the stayers too. And we are on the morning after of the Dutch elections, where the far right was expected to again make a large scoring, just as it has been across the world. And one of the main themes has been migration and letting people into this country. And I hadn't connected those wires until you started talking about language, that for the stayers, when you're hearing more and more in the place where you belong, things that you don't understand, things that you don't recognize, besides whatever people might look like. If we were even the land of the blind, where people couldn't see scarved heads and other, darker colored skin, you might even still then have a move to the right, because people are hearing things that alarm them. They alarm, the unfortunate reality is we have tribal wiring. We grew up, evolutionarily speaking, in a dangerous world. You needed to learn to recognize who your people were, and therefore who your people weren't. And that amygdala will fire gladly to warn you about pretty much anything. It would rather fire too much than too little, because if its boss gets eaten or killed, it's blown its job. It can't get passed on to the next generation. So that's why we lean towards bad news. It's better to see too much bad news, to worry about too many bad things, than to be somebody who tends to focus on it's probably okay and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Evolution would rather give us a little blood pressure problems now and then, a little anxiety, but at least you're alive. So I just wanted to segue over to that because of the elections. I think that's been a reason why the move to the right has been happening across the world.
Yes, that more and more, your home is unfamiliar to you,
and at an auditory
and it's considered
level.
A threat. Yeah, at an auditory level. Yeah,
even if your eyes were closed, you might be starting to feel a lot of anxiety. So I didn't answer your question about whether I had experiences about that.
No,
but
I think that's a brilliant
that.
example and very timely, because this is something that's happened to you, in the country that you live in, right, just in the past 24 hours. And I think this is something that you hear about in Switzerland often as well. But I have a little language story about when the only time I actually lived in Switzerland was maybe a year. I think I was 6, a year in the French part. And my parents, who needed to go to a retreat, I say the word left me in a school of French-speaking people. And I didn't know French, right? This was the first time I'd been surrounded completely in French. And I don't know how long I was there. It felt like an eternity. But they just needed to park me somewhere. And I would stay at my godparents in the evening. But I still look back at that feeling of fear and anxiety and just being in free fall and all this language that I didn't understand. But beyond not understanding the language, being reprimanded for not understanding the language, punished by teachers, by the headmaster for not knowing what they were saying or for getting it right. And I mean, they would scream and I would go into a full high alert. And then for lunches, there was nowhere for me to go. So I had to go to the headmaster's house, which was horrible. I mean, it was just, I just look back on this and she had this son who just was so mean. It was just a terrible experience altogether around language and not being able to understand what was required of me. But there is a saving grace to this story. And you want to know what that is, Doc Doug?
What's that? The
school burnt down.
Wow.
I know that sounds really macabre and psycho. My dad told me, I said to him, hey, whatever happened to that school that you threw me in? And I felt terrible. He goes, oh, it burned down. I went, hallelujah. He was mortified. I said, yeah. You know what I mean? It's just that they can't do those things anymore to people. And he goes, aren't you going to ask if anyone was in it? I was like, oh yeah. Is anybody in it? No. Oh, well. But it just goes to show, right, the effect of not being able to understand what's being required of you or what's going on. Yeah, that goes deep for me.
That goes really deep.
Yeah.
Nikki. We said our podcast was in place where we would share. And I'll share something from my side in a second. But I just want to validate what you just said, because you gave sort of the subtitles to the story, the textual track, the facts, but I can just see it in your eyes now too. That was hard.
And it wasn't long. I think it was just 2 weeks.
That is long. 2 weeks for you were
child.
6, did you say?
Yeah.
It's an eternity. And this might surprise you that I use this term, but that was a traumatic experience, I would say. Not that anybody meant for you to have. I don't point the finger at your parents. I would say, shame on you to the educators. I think we've come, hopefully, further since then. I think we've got a long way to go compared to something like that. That is just downright awful. You used a couple of words, and I hope it's okay that I hone in on them. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
You said they left me. And you packaged that as kind of sort of like a joke or theatrical, but I think that's exactly how it probably felt.
Yes.
Which is a nightmare for a child. It's a sense of abandonment. The very thing that your DNA says would be a really bad idea. And that's why I use the word traumatic. And from that 6-year-old point of view that maybe never got seen, never got heard, never got understood, just so that our listeners do not get the idea. Here's where I'm sticking up for you. My co-host is not a psychopath, folks. That 6-year-old reaction was stored in her for a long time. I'm not going to say how long, because that's Nikki's business. That's Nikki's business. But it was stored in there for a long time and needed to come out. And that's why I wanted to welcome it. I want to validate it. There was so much hurt that just got put away. And that's what she felt like doing and couldn't do, because she was dependent on the people who were there, who were treating her awfully. And there was no safe place to go. And to be fair, Nikki, I have many experiences just like it. And I didn't know the terms either. You felt parked. Mom, sorry if you're listening to this podcast, but when I got
we've talked about it. We've talked about this.
No, I'm talking to my mom here, Nikki.
The plot thickens.
That's right. Who knows? I'm making a podcast, not to score points or anything, but we're talking about this, and so I'm just being frank that when I was sent to camps, and I think the first one was when I'd have to go to camps lots of times, but usually they were just day camps, which I hated. And I think parents in the States, unfortunately, and part of that's because a 3-month summer is a long time. And I know how challenging it is to find something for your kids to do for 3 weeks, let alone 3 months.
A quarter of a year.
And there's a great emphasis in the States and in the West on being independent and learning to not need people so much. And come on, you can do it. And that was very true in my family. So it seemed that it was normal when I got on an airplane to go to a camp in Colorado for 4 weeks at the age, I think, of 10, maybe 11. And it was absolutely awful. And I think it was the year after I'd gone to a camp for 3 weeks in the north of California, which was equally awful. And that was for all the reasons you're saying. The language was still the same, but I missed home so badly. There was nobody there except some friends of mine who had come, and they were my attachment figures, but that's not a lot. How much emotional support do you get from your fellow 9-year-olds, right? I mean, I didn't know. We didn't know. And to be fair, I don't know how lost they felt. But it was scarring. It was waking up day after day to this emotional desert and going through the motions of whatever the camp counselors had. And some of these camp counselors were psychopaths. I am convinced of it, because one of them pulled out with a bunch of 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds the 357 Magnum that he had brought as a camp counselor and had in our camp room, and showed us enthralled 10-year-olds, like spun the revolver, the chamber. It's a little bit disturbing of a thing to do as I look back on it. But the most disturbing thing was when we took what should have been a fantastic trip down the Green River in, I believe it's Colorado. We had to take a long bus ride, probably 2 or 3 hours long, to get to the trailhead. And we get into these boats, and we went down class 3 and class 4, and I think possibly some class 5, but class 4 rapids are serious business.
Oh, wow.
And they happen on the first day. And I'm a 10-year-old, and I'm holding on for dear life. We didn't have to row, but the psychopathic thing that happened is, imagine being without any of your people in a situation where the counselors say there were oars that were stuck in the ground, in the sand after the rapid. And we walked to first examine the rapids. You can take these like pre-walks so you can see what the strategy is going to be and where you're about to go. Terrified. And we asked the counselors, what are those oars that are stuck in the ground? Now, I know now as an adult that those are probably oars that people lost as they went through the rapids. And so they stuck them in the sand to, this is going to make me cry as I say this, They stuck them in the sand, probably because people need, maybe people will collect them, somebody will use it. But our counselors said there's one ore for each person who's died here.
Oh.
And I believed it. Was that dramatic? Shame on you, whoever you were. I don't think I reflected on it and realized what the real situation was. But that would be a bad joke, even if you were with your friends and your family.
Yeah, as an adult.
Even as an adult, that would be a bad joke.
Read the room. I can't believe that. I can't believe, and everyone around you must have been terrified.
And this is where I'm calling our attention via that story to when your attachment system is exposed. It's like a wound that hasn't healed yet, and you lift up the Band-Aid. You need to be careful with that. Don't bring salt anywhere near that. And for some reason, and I think it's probably, the reason why people traumatize others is not because they've had a happy childhood. It's because salt has been rubbed in their wounds. We have a choice of how we handle the hurts that we encounter in our lives. This, I believe, we do have one fundamental choice in life. We probably have several, but one of them is, what will you do with the hurt that you've been given? Will you work on it and heal from it? Find the help you need, the friends you need, the therapists if necessary to heal from it? Or will you pass it on? And I think my life has been shaped by many who willingly and unwittingly made the second decision, and wanting very much to position my clients and the people I work for to make a better informed decision.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with me.
Thank you for listening.
Of course, I don't know the last time that you've probably thought about that moment, but it feels as real today as it probably was then.
I've actually never shared that. I've never shared that story before.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that, and for trusting this space and this podcast. It is Safe Passage for a reason, right, Doug? So
that's part of what we said
we go where we go.
In our intro too, was that we would be willing to explore our own transitions, our own hurts, to hopefully model for people that that's okay. And
absolutely.
To not need things from our audience, that it's not like I'm sharing a raw wound that I now want people to email me and call me and provide, support. I've done most of my work, and there's always more on myself. But we weren't going to be a podcast that just had it all polished and put together and said, this is how you do it.
No, we're learning as we go and growing as we go, which I'm really enjoying. If you're okay, I wanted to thank you. If you're okay, I wanted to touch on this term, belonging uncertainty, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's quite self-explanatory, but also profound when I first came across it. I believe originating from Dr. Jeffrey Cohen and Greg Walton, that state of mind where you actually really doubt whether you're fully accepted in a particular environment or could ever be. And yes, we can experience this at school, at work, at a snooty restaurant or a social encounter. And that resonates with me because I believe that I felt it in varying degrees my whole life. I think belonging uncertainty, if you're going to write it like a theme through my life, that is a running theme for me. I think there's an added layer of complexity when you're searching for a strong sense of belonging whilst highly mobile and you're mixed race. That's something that I've made, I've come to terms with, and I make room for it. I don't believe this belonging uncertainty will ever go away or will ever change, so I make room for it. But the way in which I've really felt this, being half Swiss, half Filipino, is when you go to either of these countries, right? There are always little signals and things that people say or do that make you feel different. And it certainly does not come from a place of malintent or malice. What I think is harder is I feel that, especially amongst my own family, I don't feel any less loved, but I know that I'm treated differently or I'm looked at differently because I am the only one that's different in the family. She's the mixed race kid. She's the one who has different experiences. Not necessarily a bad thing. They certainly don't come across it or come across in that way. But that belonging uncertainty, though we can feel it in a moment of transience in a new place, for people who I think are mixed race and highly mobile, it's consistent. And I think it's quite interesting that it's even within your own family that one can feel that. I'm sure you've heard these sorts of things before.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that part of your story too. I think the audience should know that I'm a mixed race background as well, having a Japanese father and a mother with English roots, and then having a kind of exterior that people have a difficulty placing, probably like you, Nikki, right?
Yes.
I always tell the story of when I was hiking with a bunch of Westerners around the Annapurna circuit, and I sat down on a wall, and a bunch of the Sherpas came and sat down next to me and started talking to me in Nepalese. And
that felt good, though, didn't it?
I just went along with it and acted like I understood,
And the Oscar goes too.
Right. Because with these exteriors, you can sort of, people not sure what to do with you. So that would happen in India, and it happens in South America too. But it's a different matter. Belonging uncertainty. And Jeffrey Cohen's work is wonderful and was really shaping for me in mine. And his book on belonging is a highly recommended one if people are looking for more of the scientific basis for all of these ideas. Belonging and uncertainty, I've grown up with too. Nikki, I think it's the backbone of maybe what brought us together to make this podcast. I know, and I tell audiences this story regularly of looking at my skin, which when I was younger and less gray was like chocolate brown, certainly growing up in Southern California. And all the other kids in La Jolla, California were white, and wondering, why am I this way? And I really didn't know, and nobody would tell me. I grew up not belonging. I could not figure it out. And one woman, I think when I was 6 years old and I was in a swimming pool, she said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Here." "No, but where are you ethnically from?" I didn't know what that word meant. But it was clear also that people were seeing me differently. So it's been shaping experiences like that right up to my expertise in this world of international schools and mobility and transition. It's all of one piece because I grew up not belonging. And you asked that question about languages too. And I was sent on so many wonderful, I'm glad that it happened, sort of exchange programs where I was an exchange student of sorts in France for a summer, and then went to Japan also. And quite frankly, I got very used to just not getting it. It became so normal that, well, I just don't get it. I just don't belong here.
and that continues to this. You don't resist,
yeah. And I continues to this day, also professionally, because I'm a Dutch therapist, but I do like lots of other things, so I don't also sometimes feel like I completely belong in the Dutch mental health world.
I think
I've learned to embrace that.
We need to perhaps stop expecting this box because people like to put people in boxes. I mean, quite literally. I know when I was applying for university in the United States, they asked me which one of these boxes I belonged to. And it was the first time in my life I realized, oh my gosh, I don't belong to any of them. So I have to click others, right? You just live your life being others because it says other. Are you this? Are you that? And what was so interesting was that there were really so many different options, but none of them applied. But for me, growing up in England, when I look back at that time, I really was unaware of race or looking different. I mean, apart from my own family, there it was very obvious. But at school, absolutely not. But it was going to the United States where people really wanted to understand where you fit in, what category.
And put you in a
because
box.
It is, put me in a box because it is so multicultural. And then you don't fit into that box, so there's one for everyone else. Yep. And you do you get used to that, right? But at the same time, I've also embraced it. I really love this. And whenever people ask me, where are you from? Because again, mixed race plus highly mobile, third culture kid or cross-cultural kid or adult moving in your adulthood. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. That's so funny. That never happened before. Okay, wait up.
That was important then. That only happens when there's something important. Yeah.
Really?
No, I always tell people it'll come back. You were talking about belonging, and you were ejected from belonging even in your own train of thought.
Okay. You know what? Okay, maybe there is something going on in the background. It's, again, my wanting to justify that I am grateful for this upbringing and that I am grateful for this life. Always wanting to be cautious that though we talk about some of the hard things, that I don't sound like that type of person that says, poor me, poor me, poor me. And we hear this all the time, having to justify, having to not feel as if we're, I guess ungrateful for the life with all its complexities, right?
Isn't that another form of simplification too, that we're subjected to, that everybody is subjected to? One of the most important things in this work is to use the word "and." It's maybe the most important word in the English language from a psychological point of view. It's really, you're really grateful. Wonderful things have happened because of it. And it was really hard. And
it was really hard. Yes.
We become the people that we are, the wonderful people that we are, the wonderful artists that are out there making our music, our paintings, whatever, not because of the easy times. It's because of the challenges. Any artist that was only singing about peaches and cream and here's more peaches and cream, it would get pretty boring pretty quickly.
No, you're right. And I've actually remembered what I was going to say. But I agree with you there. Whoa. And I've remembered what I was going to say because it was important.
But it was related to this idea of I can't go there. I gotta be grateful. I gotta end on a positive note. So what was it? Now I'm so curious.
No, it was the big concept of home, which you touched on, right? And we hear this often, folks who do live in this way or grew up in this way, we can't answer some of the most basic questions. And that is, you said, where are you from and where is home? So when you don't have a physical home to go home to, right? Because you may have experienced a lot of different communities, but never fully integrated long enough in any one of them. So to not have a physical place to call home, I mean, home and belonging, they've got to be related, Doc Doug, in some way, right? So what's your take on that, having been a guidance counselor to so many students and perhaps other adults who have felt this way, that home is not actually a place, it's something else. What's that relationship, home and belonging, and not being able to answer a really simple question?
It's not a simple question.
Some people would say, the thing is that people expect a simple answer. Some people expect a simple answer, not all.
I know. And that's where I think in certain ways, TCKs and CCKs are the leading edge still. Anybody who's got profound experiences with moving, the leading edge of a certain phenomenon that we all are faced with in a human life. And that is to, and this is going to sound cliche, but cliches exist because they're true so often, is to feel at home in ourselves. That, in my opinion, is the goal of this human journey. Who am I? How can I feel at home in this person that I've been given to be? On the back of my cards for my private practice, there's a little joke that I mean. It's not a joke. It's sincere, but most people don't notice it because most people only look at the front of business cards. And on the back is my little swallow, and it's tweeting, trying to find your way home. And so many people who have the experience of healing would endorse that very statement. It feels like I'm at home in me. It feels that I belong in me. And I believe, and this is probably leading towards maybe where you were wanting to wrap up our podcast today, but that that is the ultimate sense of belonging that we really need to both be whole in ourselves, but also to be fully effective at the most effective level in whatever it is that we have to do on this planet. And if that's helping other people with their sense of belonging, as many people who follow Span's work or this podcast, they might feel that's part of what their mission is in life, we'd be well served to keep working on belonging in ourselves, to put that front and center. At Span, we would always say, and I think I say it in the book, and stewardesses and stewards in airplanes say it all the time, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first. I think in Span's first decade, I focused especially on that oxygen analogy, but I think it's gotten deeper as I've gotten older, that it's about belong in yourself first. Keep working on that. Keep taking care of that. And then you will be able to do great things in whatever domain of work it is. We happen to be focusing on transitions, but I would argue that anybody who really, really feels this sense of rootedness in themselves is going to be good at anything.
Yeah, I agree. I always say when I meet people or I come across people who look like they're very close to burnout or feel guilty for not being able to give 100% of themselves in some capacity, I always stop them and I say, think of all the roles that you play on a daily basis, the relationships that are meaningful to you and vice versa. If you don't work on cultivating that inner strength, whether it's healing, whether it's quiet time, whether it's time away from something, or just focusing on you and putting on that oxygen mask, as you said. If you don't do that, it's really hard to fulfill all these responsibilities that you take on a daily basis, whether you cognitively do it or not, or consciously do it or not, right? But if you do that, if you do nourish that and understand that it is just as important as being able to deliver or be valuable or be productive, then of course you'll become a better father or friend or partner or neighbor or colleague, right? It's really something that we need to, it's not selfish. I think that's what I'm trying to say. That kind of care and being on your own or doing whatever you need to do to be of better service is simply not selfish. In fact, it's required if you're really going to become a valuable member in community. In community is what we look for, right? These connections.
You could argue that it's selfless when you are really, really in touch, not in an ego sense, but with who you are, then and only then, as you just said, can you go out and be as optimally effective in whatever it is that you do, who you are. Absolutely. And I think we have that confused. I think that oftentimes the counsel from the world is to do more and try harder. But I use the metaphor of, a river. And when you're in a turbid river and you can't see anything like in the water, you've dropped something down there and you try to push that murky water out of the way so you can maybe see better, you're just making it worse. And I have been known to do that for more decades than I cared. I think this is a relatively new insight as I get older. I think I knew it up here, but I think I had to go through my own very recent hard times, which we'll get to in other settings, to realize the power and the importance of slowing down and letting that water clear on its own terms and on its own timeline. And then you can see. And it's important to maintain that by maintaining that clarity with mindfulness practices, meditation practices, anything that people do, whatever you need, walking, running, as long as it's time to get centered and stay clear, and then go out in the world and do what you do, right?
Yeah. I think time really is the theme here, even just when we're looking at belonging. We talked about the 6 months to unpack your heart, etc. It is being comfortable with the fact that the feeling that you would like to have, that feeling of safety and security and connection to other people, that it will take longer than you would like. It will always take longer than you would like. And being able to lean into that and be open to that kind of almost neutral zone or emptiness, and knowing that it will take as long as it takes and you cannot put a fine mark on it. Just knowing that time will get you to a place where you will have that warm, fuzzy feeling of being fully accepted as you are. That will happen, but it will take time. And two, the willingness as well, right? That's something that you had mentioned. And I do empathize with certain people who are more introverted. It will take longer, right? And let me ask you this. If there's someone who's not confident in making new connections, especially in a new place, what are some of the strategies that they can take on, even if it's just one small step, to feel like they're working towards connecting with community rather than isolating, if it's not in their nature?
Get out and talk to somebody, if only that.
Yeah.
And always slice it smaller. If it seems too big, then go less far, talk less long. There's nothing wrong with being us introverts, but we do need to manage. Everybody needs to manage their personality. That's arguably another task that we're given, is how to learn to manage this thing, this constellation of characteristics, personality traits that we have. So, yeah. Staying inside and in your own head is never as effective as behavior. The fast road to all change. You have thoughts, you have feelings, and you have behavior. If you want to speed things up, choose for behavior. The feelings might say, I can't, I'm scared. The thoughts might say, no good is going to happen from this. What's the point? But if you behave, it's the school of faking it until you make it. Not overdoing that. Don't push yourself too far beyond your boundary zones. But if you don't challenge your comfort zone, nothing happens in life. I mean, look at us making this podcast. We could have gone, oh, this is scary. Maybe people won't like what we're saying. Maybe I'll say something. Maybe I'll say too many. Maybe I'll say more dumb things than useful things, right? But if you don't try, then nothing happens. And so we're leaning into behavior and just do something. And then you'll see, and make sure you give yourself a pat on the back. I did something. Keep a ledger of what you did. I did that yesterday. I did that the day before. If you do enough things, the universe will do its part. All you have to do is your part.
Yes, you're showing your willingness. You're showing your willingness. And you're demonstrating it and you're getting it done. And I like what you said. If it's too much, you slice it, right? Maybe tomorrow you'll have a bit more confidence than you did yesterday, or vice versa. I think this is really, really sound tips from Doc Doug. I wanted to ask, what would you recommend to someone listening who knows of somebody new to their community and would like to help them feel more welcome?
Wonderful question. So we all know people like that. Take a moment first to picture somebody. Even if you don't know the person actually by face, just the setting that this could potentially happen. I think it's really important to first get your intention right. Do you really want to give somebody the experience of belonging? Because if you really want that, that's really special. So first, just realize that. And small things, when people are walking around with an open wound, small things, just a little bit of ointment can just feel so good. So what you're considering doing is a really big deal. So if your intention really is to give somebody that feeling, not just do it to check a box that I did my good deed for the day. I was thinking that you could walk up to somebody and make sure you look them in the eye and just say, hey, I'm glad you're here. I think you're new, and I'm glad you're here. I mean, imagine if somebody said that to you.
Yes.
Huh? I noticed that you're new.
I'm glad you're here.
And I just wanted you to know I'm glad you're here. And then see what happens.
Yeah, that will make a world of difference. Just hearing that already, you know.
Right.
You know, one of the things that I always loved about Zurich, where I live now, I think it was definitely more prevalent when I was growing up. You still see it now, at least in the town that I'm in, is every time you pass by a person on the street, you say grüezi or good morning, or you basically acknowledge that they exist. Every single person who you come across on the street. Not in the big city, because you'd be there all day. You'd need 50 million gallons of water by the end of the day. But in the smaller towns and in the villages, it is absolutely, it's the polite thing to do. And I love that, because here I'm new, but at least every morning I know someone is looking at me and acknowledging that I exist, and vice versa. And we were talking about that feeling of being invisible when we don't feel like we belong because we're still new, we're still the outsider. I love this part of living here, this part of the culture.
That's wonderful.
We're very lucky.
And you're fortunate indeed, and to be in a place where that's the norm and not where it's considered like strange to do that, because that's just cumulatively alienating when you walk by more and more people who don't see you and just look at you like you're glass. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, because it's done so often here, I get upset when someone doesn't say good morning. I'll tell my husband, we said good morning and they just ignored us. And he goes, that's okay, Nikki. Don't take it personally. I said, well, I'm taking it a little personally today. I don't know you either, and I'm saying good morning. But it's this need, this connection, right? Even these small micro connections make such a difference. But
micro connections, that's a great word. We needed that earlier in the conversation. Thank you for that. Did you just make that up?
No, this is a good friend of mine is a human connections expert. Her name is Simone Heng. She's on her second book now, and she's talked about the different types of connections that we have. And I remember micro connections because it's what you had described, the chat with the baker, the postman, the person on the street, all of these different connections. We actually need them. Yeah. They may have different weight, but we need them. So when you were giving your examples of the roots and capillaries, she has her version there. So we'll definitely have her on this podcast at some point, because I know the two of you would get on like a house on fire.
Great. She'll be one of our first guests.
Yeah. All right. So let us wrap this up. I'm hoping that you could lead us in a short mindfulness pause, as we have a lot of things to settle today, but I'm really, really glad that we went and followed our gut. Just a disclosure to all of you listeners out there, there's about 15 other questions I wanted to ask Doc Doug, but I'm really glad to know that this means that this is a huge topic with lots of beautiful layers that we will get into in other episodes. And I like that we just lent in and that we were both open, Doc Doug. So I'm sure this also brought up a few things for listeners. So I think now's a good time to let it all settle.
Right back at you with the sense of there's so much here. And I think we all, listeners included, need time to come to terms with all the micro connections to these points we're touching on. Thank you also, Nikki, for being the first to sort of open that personal door and take us down that 6-year-old pathway that you brought us to, because it's really important to use ourselves, I think, in this work. And that had me go down the Green River. And that's probably had.
And thanks for doing that. That wasn't easy. That's the first time you said you've shared it. So thank you for going there.
Thank you for helping me make a space where we feel comfortable doing that. And I think the conversation indeed probably has maybe stirred some things up for listeners. And maybe it's incumbent on us and on me as a practicing therapist to help people just let that murk settle with a quiet moment here towards the end, maybe a little longer than a minute or two, because this is big stuff. Feel free to, sometimes I think, Nikki, we turn our cameras off, but people can do that themselves. They don't have to, maybe people are only listening anyway, but I kind of have a tendency to close my own eyes. So I'll model that when I'm trying to do this also for myself, but all that murk that gets kicked up. Let's just give ourselves a chance to take a big deep breath in through our nose all the way down to our bellies. And just honor the fact that a couple of deep breaths are almost always good, if not necessary, to let that parasympathetic nervous system come back fully online, the part of our central nervous system where we feel safe. And you can help that occur by breathing in for, say, 7 seconds, and then breathing out for longer than 7 seconds, let's say 11, 13. You can purse your lips to let the air out more slowly like a balloon. Just keep breathing this way as I invite all of us to remember something. In for 7, out for 11. Really feeling that breath go down to the bottoms of your lungs as though they went all the way down to the bottom of your belly. And I'd like to invite everybody to remember something that I personally believe to be true. And many great therapists and spiritual leaders have said this very thing long before I. And that's that this sense of belonging inside ourselves that we were talking about, that deep, 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 deep down, like that most central ring in a tree with 30, 50, 70 rings, doesn't matter. There was a first one, and that was that ring you were when you came into this world as a newborn. You had no question whatsoever about whether you belonged here. You knew you did. And the good news in all of this is that that is still right there inside you. And it's right there inside all of us. You might not think so. You might not feel that right now. You might be going through such a hard time, so much turbidity in the water, that you cannot feel what I'm saying right now. Don't worry, though. First of all, I've been there many times. Anybody who's being honest has been. But when the murk settles, when you do whatever you need to do in this journey of yours, that sense of perfect belongingness and okayness is there inside you, just waiting. And I think that's a really reassuring thought that's helped me get through some murky patches, and I hope it helps you. So, enjoy.
Thank you very much for that. I really did enjoy that. Thank you. I think that's the perfect way to ground the moment, to remember that we belong here, we belong in ourselves, and sometimes we need to do that kind of work too, and just be gentle. Just be gentle. Thank you. Thank you so much, Doc Doug. And to those of you listening, I hope that this has helped you feel less alone in what can be an overwhelmingly isolating moment of transition when we're in search of community. Or maybe if you know of someone new in your neck of the woods, perhaps there's a deeper sense of compassion and empathy for their experience. So thank you for spending time with us today, and know you are always welcome to our little cozy corner here on Safe Passage, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, listeners. Bye, everybody.